Hello friends, I hope you're doing well. Today, we're going to talk about a problem that 90% of bodybuilding enthusiasts face. So you've been training for months, even years, and unfortunately nothing is happening. You're no longer making progress and you're wondering why, because you feel like you're doing everything right. Whether it's training, diet, or recovery. But unfortunately, there's no progress, nothing is happening. I've met hundreds of enthusiasts who have this kind of problem and who stagnate at some point. And it's because they make fundamental mistakes that we will see in this video. We will look at the 4 mistakes that prevent you from progressing and how to precisely restart that progress. And above all, stay until the end, because the 4th mistake will really help you reach a new level. And it's the one that destroys the most physiques. So stay with me, friends. Here we go. We arrive at the room, and like that, I will explain to you a little more in detail, in immersion. Let's go. The first mistake is forgetting your big shot before your session. No, I'm joking. Obviously, that's always optional. The little pre-workout that feels good for food, energy, focus, and pump. That doesn't count as a fundamental mistake, don't worry. So I'm going to take advantage of my back biceps session today to talk to you about these 4 mistakes. In the meantime, let's get started. Here we go, pull up. That could have been a mistake, by the way, not doing pull-ups in your session. No, more seriously, the first mistake is spending 2 hours at the gym, for example, and never really truly pushing yourself hard. I see many people doing 5, 6 exercises per muscle, 20, 25 sets, spending 2 hours at the gym. And in reality, it's a huge volume, but there's very little intensity. Because if we had real intensity, if we truly pushed ourselves on each repetition, on each set, we couldn't spend 2 hours at the gym and do so much volume in a single session. So that's really the main mistake. It's that most practitioners think they're pushing hard, but in reality, they could still do several more repetitions. Let's say, up their sleeve. They're not really giving their all in their session. They could put in much more intensity and they really don't realize it. And that's why they're not progressing. The solution to all this is to push harder, because most of the time we feel like we're really giving it our all, but in reality, that's not the case at all. I even noticed this with my brother, who thought he was training really, really hard, but actually by training with me for these 3 weeks, he realized that he wasn't putting enough intensity into his sessions. So there was a large volume of sessions nonetheless, but he simply didn't have enough intensity. So you really have to push hard. If the last reps seem too easy, it means it's really not heavy enough, that you're not giving it your all, that you're not feeling the muscle contraction, let's say, with each repetition. And that's really essential. For example, here, I didn't push at all. I could have done at least 10 more, but this was the warm-up. So it's logical, it's normal for the first set. It's always like that. It's okay to keep a few reps in reserve. But afterwards, when you're doing the actual working sets, I shouldn't be able to do even one more with good execution quality. And the big problem is that there are many who are content to just follow their program. It says, let's say 4 sets of 10 on your workout program. What do? You do your 10 reps without asking yourself if you could do 1, 2, 3, 4 more, even though in reality, it's very likely. So try not to necessarily focus on that specific program, or maybe it's poorly designed, or your weights aren't suitable, but instead try to operate based on how you feel at the moment. Because one day you might be able to do your 10 repetitions without any problem, but maybe another day you'll be more tired because you slept less, have more stress or other reasons, and you might end up being unable to do them. So actually really try to do your session based on your condition of the day, and if you can do 12, 15 or even more, well, just do them. But you really need to go until, as I often say, technical failure. That means from the moment your technique truly deteriorates, that's when you can stop. You've reached, let's say, your limit. On the other hand, there are also those who think that you absolutely need to train to muscle failures to progress. What is muscle failure? It means you can't do even one more repetition. Whereas technical failure means you could potentially do one more rep, but by degrading the movement's technique. So these are two different things, and I'm really more in favor of going to technical failure rather than muscle failure. And regarding scientific studies, some indeed prove that muscle failure can be effective for certain types of exercises, but this is not necessarily the case for everything. You also have to consider the fact that it puts enormous pressure on the body to begin with. It causes a lot of stress, impacts both physical and nervous recovery, not to mention the risk of injury as well. And so in the end, in the long term, it's not the best option. So it could potentially be beneficial in the short term for certain exercises and slightly longer sets, around 12 to 15 repetitions, whereas for short sets, it hasn't been proven to be more effective. And on top of that, in terms of recovery in the long term, we know very well that recovery is just as important as the training itself for muscle mass gain. If it impacts recovery, that's in causing more stress. It means more cortisol, which means more difficulty in recovering and preparing for future sessions. Ultimately, in the long term, it's not the best, it's not beneficial. So what I would recommend is to go to technical failure on most basic movements, like all bench presses, incline presses, even dumbbell presses, all rowing exercises, deadlifts, and squats, and not to use muscular failure because it's already dangerous. You need a partner, and even with partners, accidents can happen very quickly. Why not possibly on exercises that are a bit more isolating, but on slightly longer sets, around 10 to 15 reps on exercises like curls, for example, or triceps. Once again, in a controlled manner, because an accident can happen quickly, even with this type of exercise. But it's true that there are fewer risks, let's say. Once again, I'm not too much of a supporter of that. I prefer to stop as soon as I feel that the technique is degrading, but it sometimes happens to me on exercises, as I mentioned, isolation ones to go to muscle failure, but not on all sets. Possibly on the last set of each exercise, but no more. The second mistake, friends, is not implementing progression, which is also known as progressive overload. That is to say, if you always use the same weights from session to session and you don't increase the weights that aren't moving, well, obviously you won't make progress. It's a bit like if you do exactly the same thing in your business when you're an entrepreneur, if you apply exactly the same actions, the same advertising budgets for months and months, and you change absolutely nothing, well, your figures won't move. So it's exactly the same in sports. I think like that now. So if you don't apply progressive overload in your training, there will be no progress. But be careful. Progressive overload doesn't only mean weight, because inevitably at some point in terms of weight, you will be limited. Because at the beginning, when you're a beginner, it's easy to gain strength in the first year or even the first 2 years. So you can increase, let's say, maybe 5 kilos on your bench press bar every 2 weeks to every month. But after a few years, it's not possible. At some point, you're not going to exceed 200 kilos or more on the bench press or even on other movements. So inevitably, progressive overload itself will not only be insufficient in terms of weight, but on top of that, it will become more dangerous because you'll inevitably have to lift increasingly heavier weights. And so it's also riskier. And as you get older, you'll see when you pass 40 like me, that in the end, you'll rely on other parameters that still involve progressive overload, but not necessarily just weight. So progressive overload, yes. It's about weight, it's about increasing the weight, but it's not just that. It might be increasing the number of repetitions, it could be increasing the session volume, always maintaining good intensity, be careful. It could be playing with the execution tempos. Let's say you always use the same tempo, like I did here. For example, you don't change the load, but instead you slow down the tempo. Instead of doing a tempo, for example, of 2010, meaning you take 2 seconds to go down, 0 at the bottom, 1 second to come up, and 0 time at the top. If you do a tempo of 3020, well, it will be a progressive overload because you will increase the time under tension. You will go down in 3 seconds here, you will go up in 2 seconds, and so on. And so in this way, you are effectively doing a progressive overload. It can be the same thing in the same way by using other training intensification techniques, which I'm also very fond of in all my programs. In fact, you can find them in most of my programs in my new application, MetamorphX. So I also advise you to check what you have access to in the premium subscription, because it includes all in my programs, whether for cutting, bulking, or even for beginners, with exclusive videos, including videos that explain in detail all the training intensification techniques. Specifically, it includes drop sets, super slow reps, and many other techniques that I sometimes discuss in videos. But there are still many other things. There are the 21 methods. There are giant sets. There are many things we can implement that are also, in a way, a form of progressive overload. I really like using them because it allows for less weight and fewer injuries to the joints, tendons, etc. And there is a lot of progress. As a result, whether for me or for all of my students who use this kind of intensification technique. And speaking of progressive overload, we're going to take a slightly heavier bar, right? The weight of the item in question is precisely 100 pounds. You can rest assured that I am not yet attempting to lift or handle a weight that amounts to 100 kilograms. At this point in time, my focus remains solely on managing the current weight, which that was failure. I could have helped myself by swinging my torso, but in this case, it would have been a cheated repetition and it would have gone beyond muscle failure. So that's what I don't recommend. And always remember to control the descent in your exercises, in each of your exercises. The eccentric phase is just as important as the concentric phase. And know that you can lift the movement, and on the last reps, you might not be able to do one more rep concentrically. However, eccentrically, yes, because we are always stronger in the eccentric phase. So really think about controlling the descent in each of the exercises. As a result, it's really like you're doing an extra set, or at least giving your all on the last repetition. That's also important to remember. And also consider, if you can, keeping a training journal. It's always useful for noting your weights, tracking your progress. This helps you apply progressive overload weekly, monthly, and track progress. All of this, in fact, you can also do on my application MetamorphX. You can record all your weights at each session, and as a result, well, it's integrated into the application. So that way you don't have to worry about it. You can directly see the weights you used the previous week and then readjust, and as a result, see and track all your progress. There you go, session's over, friends. It was a good back and bicep session, and I can tell you that I'm exhausted. All I want right now is to go have my snack. I won't say rest because I don't have time to rest, but at least to go sit down and work by the pool. All this to say that if you finish your session feeling like you could still do another exercise, more sets, or even go for a sprint or something, it means your session wasn't effective or intense enough. So normally, after each session, you should be exhausted, completely wiped out, and you should feel that after 2 days of training, you need a rest day because of how much you've pushed your body. That's why, for some people, I recommend taking a rest day during the week. So, for example, if you train on Monday and Tuesday, well, on Wednesday, you take a rest day to start again on Thursday and Friday. For those who train 5 days a week or 6 days like me, Sunday will be the rest day, for example. But in any case, your body will remind you. When you're really exhausted, when you've given it your all, well, you'll know it. So now, let's go back home to talk to you about the next 2 common mistakes, especially regarding nutrition. So now I'm going to have my little snack so I can talk to you about that at the same time. And also about the last one, which is very important. But to summarize the first 2, As I told you, the first mistake is not having enough intensity in your session. And the second mistake is not applying progressive overload. Whatever the form of progressive overload, it's not seeking progressiveness in your training from week to week, month to month, and year to year. You will see that when you have, like me, 28 years of training, you will look for more and more intensification techniques in training because progressive overload in terms of weight will not be enough. And especially if you want to continue in the long term and indeed surpass 30 years of training or even more, you will need to take care of yourself, take care of your joints. And for that, you will need to find other techniques than simply increasing the weight at each session. All right, let's go, friends. I'm going to talk to you about the next 2 mistakes to absolutely avoid, and as soon as we get home. To have a little afternoon snack with my Whey Hydro Isolate Zero with some puffed brown rice grains. It's not very caloric and has a very low glycemic index. Excellent. And sometimes I slice a banana into it. And here, a bit of creatine. I've taken 4 grams. I've 1 gram with my pre-workout, and generally 5 grams per day is sufficient. So we come to our third mistake, which is a fatal error, having a diet that is too approximate. Because for years, I've heard many practitioners, when I ask them what they do in terms of diet, they tell me, oh yeah, but I eat well, I pay attention. But actually it means nothing, I eat well or I pay attention. It means absolutely nothing. If you don't know how many calories you need for your goal, whether it's bulking or cutting, it simply won't work. If your goal is to bulk up and you're eating like a bird, you'll never gain a gram of muscle. It's simple. If you're not in a slight caloric surplus, well, it won't work. So there are many who tell me, yeah, but I eat a lot, and I don't gain a gram. Well, it's simply because you're not in a caloric surplus. You think you're eating a lot, but actually, no, you're not eating enough. And conversely, someone who wants to cut and eats like a marathon runner, well, they'll never lose fat. I remember that very well too. I really thought at the time, I'm talking about more than 20 years ago now, that I was eating well. Because I had read in all the magazines back then and all that, examples of diets, what was needed. And then, of course, I had also studied it, but I hadn't yet completed my training on nutrition, etc. I hadn't really pushed it to the extreme, and I hadn't yet participated in my first competitions. So I'm talking about that. It was even before 2003, because my first competition was in 2003, 2004. And in reality, when I saw competition physiques, competitors, bodybuilders of that time, I really thought it was impossible to have a lean physique naturally. In fact, I had told myself it's either genetics or substances. But basically, I thought I didn't have the genetics to have defined abs to be lean, to be able to consider competing. I hadn't realized the impact of a truly calibrated diet, precisely where each food is weighed. And it was really then, when I started my very first competition back then, in FFH-MFAC, a natural federation at the time, I weighed less than 80 kilos. It was the very first time in my life, even though I'd been doing bodybuilding for over 8 years at the time, that I truly saw what it meant to be lean, actually. Now, because, I started weighing all my food. I didn't deviate at all for 6 months, a year at the time for those first competitions, but it worked. Quite simply, why? Because I had an approximate diet until then, and I wasn't weighing my food. I had absolutely no idea what I was eating. So naturally, I couldn't get lean, and I couldn't achieve an extreme level of leanness that I had during my first competitions, even though it wasn't as extreme as it could have been in my later competitions, etc. Because experience also plays a role. There's muscle maturity, there are many factors, and there are beginner mistakes at the start, naturally. But all this to tell you that nutrition is really 80% of the results in bodybuilding. I keep repeating it, but it's true.
It's really something that should not be taken lightly. You shouldn't say to yourself, yeah, but I eat healthy. I only eat unprocessed foods. I eat this, I eat that. But that means absolutely nothing. If you don't calculate your caloric needs, it won't work. So all of this you can very well do with my application MetamorphX. So even for free, you have a calorie and macro calculator integrated into it. So when you sign up for the app, it will actually ask for your age, your weight, your activity level. It will ask you for a whole bunch of parameters, your goal, and then there will be an automatic calculation of how much you need to eat in terms of calories based on your goal and your lifestyle and many other factors. And then you'll be able to track all your calories, your macros, etc. every day. You'll be able to scan your food simply by scanning the barcode here. Same for that, etc., etc. Tack. And then you'll have your daily nutrition journal displayed, so you'll know exactly how many calories you've consumed in the day. And it's only this way that you'll be able to truly progress, whether it's in terms of cutting or bulking, no matter your goal. This is really what will make the difference. And believe me, I was skeptical too at the beginning, before 2002, 2003. And as soon as I started to really calculate my calories, weigh my food, it was radical. It was really like night and day. I really encourage you to simply calculate your caloric needs based on your goals, and don't tell yourself, but I'm doing what I need to. I eat a lot and I can't gain a gram. No. It's just that you're not eating enough simply because your metabolism might be much faster than someone else's. Or conversely, I can't get lean, I can't lose fat. Yeah, but do you really know how much you're eating? Because there are some who say, yeah, but I eat nothing. I only eat salad. I only eat chicken. I eat. So for some, indeed, it's real. Except that, in fact, they do this all week. But on the weekend, they eat 10,000 calories. So in the end, it ruins all the efforts of the week. They don't even realize it. But a drink here, a drink there, then a slice of pizza, then a piece of cake, then a little something else. And well, it very quickly increases the number of calories. All it takes is having a slow metabolism or having crashed your metabolism. Quite simply, well, it won't work. And it's true that some people have faster metabolisms than others, and we are all unequal in that regard. There are those who won't gain weight despite eating a lot, and vice versa. So in that regard, we are really not equal, but metabolism can also change with age, but also with weight training, nutrition, supplements, and quite a few things. But in any case, it's not something fixed. And finally, we come to the fourth mistake, which is the lack of discipline, especially, and then constantly looking for excuses. The lack of discipline is the most common, meaning that most of the time, we see many practitioners who say to themselves, that's it, I'm going to start weight training. Also the New Year's resolutions, they persist in going to the gym every day. And it lasts 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, and by the fourth week, they're fed up, they stop because they don't see results. And it's normal. In weight training, you don't see immediate results either. That's not how it works. It takes months, even years to really start seeing good results. And then, of course, once again, everything depends on the person's genetics. Everything depends on the commitment. Everything depends on the intensity put into the training, the seriousness, and above all, once again, the discipline. So inevitably, if after a few weeks you don't see results and you stop, if you give up, well, it won't work. And it's the same for everything. So that, for me, is really the main fundamental mistake. It's discipline. And you will see that if you really apply all of this, if you commit to a truly rigorous and strict diet, it doesn't mean you can't enjoy yourself from time to time, of course. But if you apply this, if you follow a very specific program and are consistent, well, you will see that after 3 weeks, in fact, it has been scientifically proven, you will establish habits, routines that will seem much less difficult to apply in the long term. That is to say, it's hard at first, because it indeed takes you out of your comfort zone. And after a while, you will see that the difficulty will be somewhat less to maintain. And in fact, that's discipline. You will really need this discipline and perseverance to continue making progress and stop constantly making excuses by always talking about products, about performance-enhancing drugs. Yes, it's true that performance-enhancing drugs exist, but just because some people use them doesn't mean you should convince yourself that it's impossible to have a decent physique or to make progress on your own compared to who you are without any products. And as a result, there's often this excuse that comes up to avoid giving it your all, to say, oh yeah, but he's on drugs, so I'll never be able to achieve with his physique, so there's no point in doing the work because it won't work. Well, that's precisely a fundamental mistake that makes us think, well, actually no, because they're all on drugs. Those who are better than me, those who are more muscular than me, those who are leaner than me, well, it's because they're on drugs. And if you start reacting like that, you'll never progress in terms of physique, and it's exactly the same in any other area of life. When I see a lot of haters also criticizing my so-called lifestyle, saying that I inherited or whatever, that I come from a wealthy family or something, or that I won the lottery or something like that. In fact, all of that is also just excuses to tell oneself, I can't accept that the guy worked like crazy for 20 years to build his so-called fitness empire, his business, and that thanks to all of that, he managed to achieve goals that, well, I myself won't be able to reach. These are also excuses we make in life. So it's exactly the same thing for bodybuilding, for business, for everything. If you start saying that others who have succeeded, well, it's because they have things that you don't have, that they have secrets, magic pills, or other things, then it will never work for you. So try to see your progress in relation to yourself, in relation to who you are, and simply try to improve yourself without trying to resemble someone else. So you might say to me, yeah, but you're on TRT or whatever, etc., etc. Yes, and so what does TRT mean? TRT alone is not going to have, you're not going to have my physique just with TRT. I've been training for 28 years and I started TRT after turning pro. So that means my pro card at the time, although some don't believe it, I got it 100% naturally. So when I was in men's physique, I weighed 82 kilos at the time. Obviously, the criteria are not the same as today. If today I had to turn pro in men's physique, given the size of the guys, it probably wouldn't be possible 100% naturally, even without TRT. But back then, almost 10 years ago, it's not quite 10 years, but it's been, I don't know, maybe 6 or 7 years. The physiques were not the same. From the moment I turned pro, did my first pro competition, and really got a slap in the face because I saw that the physiques were just damn unattainable compared to what I had given. That's when I decided to go on TRT. Also because I had done a lot of competitions for years between Muscle Mania, NPC competitions to get my pro card in men's physique, etc. I had been competing for years and years. Naturally, the fact of doing back-to-back competitions with ultra-strict diets meant my testosterone was completely out of whack. So I needed to rebalance my levels. But that doesn't mean my levels are now above normal. They are completely within the norms. They are optimized, of course, but they are not outside physiological limits. So they are within the physiological limits for a man over 40. So all this to tell you that there is no magic solution. So yes, indeed, there will be some who will say, I'm going to do a steroid cycle and then in 3 months I'll gain 10, 15 kilos more. Yeah, maybe. But in the end, as soon as you stop, you'll actually lose everything. And it will be even worse than before because you won't even have proper natural testosterone production anymore. You won't be able to maintain the muscle mass you gained during your cycle, and you'll experience all the possible and unimaginable side effects. And so that's really also the classic beginner mistakes of those who want to have a pro bodybuilder physique. When they've just started working out and they don't have the basics, they don't have a strict diet plan at all, they don't even know how to train, and well, you can take whatever you want, you'll never have a decent physique. So that's also another thing where we feel like saying to ourselves, yeah, but there are magical things that will make me get there faster. So actually, since I'm not taking them, I won't make it. So all this to say that discipline is really essential for success in bodybuilding, but in any other area of life. It's really what will make the difference. And above all, stop always finding excuses and focus on yourself, progress in relation to yourself. Don't say, I want to achieve this or that physique. I want to look like this or that person. So yes, we can obviously be inspired. I was inspired by Arnold, by other bodybuilders, but that doesn't mean I told myself I will look like them. I might want to get closer to their physique, but at no point did I say I would have the same physique. But by telling yourself, I just want to progress compared to what I am today, it will already change the way you see things, and you will set much more realistic goals. It will be easier, in quotes, for you to make the efforts to get there because it is much more realistic. So there you go, friends. I know I digress, that I go on, I make a long speech, but in any case, I hope these little tips have helped you for the future and also motivated you. So remember well these 4 little tips we talked about in this video. So as a reminder, the first tip is the intensity in your workouts in particular. The second tip is all about progressive overload. The third tip is about diet, nutrition, and the fourth tip is mainly about discipline and stopping making excuses. There you go, friends. With that, I'll see you very, very soon for new videos. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel. And above all, don't give up. Bye-bye.